Hello, friends, and welcome back to the Green Hack. Last summer, I found myself standing in front of a garden bed that looked completely different from what I had imagined earlier in the season. Just a few weeks before, those tomato plants had been growing beautifully. The leaves were rich and green, the stems were strong, and everything seemed to be moving in the right direction. Then the weather changed. Day after day, the temperatures climbed higher. The sun felt harsher, and the garden seemed to struggle under the pressure of a long stretch of summer heat. At first, I told myself not to worry. Every gardener experiences difficult weather from time to time. I kept watering carefully and continued my normal routine. But as the days passed, I started noticing small changes. The plants were still alive, but they no longer looked as vibrant as they had before. Some leaves appeared tired. Growth seemed slower. The entire bed felt like it had lost some of its energy. Every morning, I walked through the backyard with a cup of coffee in my hand, stopping beside those plants and trying to figure out what they needed. The frustrating part was that nothing seemed obviously wrong. There were no major pest problems. There was no dramatic damage, yet something felt different. Standing there one morning, looking across that tired garden bed, I honestly started wondering if the season was already slipping away. At that moment, I had no idea that a simple conversation with another gardener was about to change the way I looked at recovery in the garden. A few days after I started worrying about that garden bed, I had a conversation that completely caught me off guard. I was visiting a local gardening supply store, hoping to find something that might help my struggling plants. While I was browsing, I ran into another gardener I had known for years. He had one of those gardens that always seemed healthy no matter what the weather was doing. We started talking about the season, and before long, I found myself describing the problems I had been seeing in my tomato bed. He listened carefully and nodded as I explained everything. Then he asked a question I never expected to hear. Have you ever tried seaweed? For a moment, I honestly thought he was joking. Seaweed was something I associated with the beach, not the vegetable garden. I remember laughing and saying exactly that. He smiled and explained that many gardeners had been using seaweed-based products for years as part of their regular garden routine. The more he talked, the more curious I became. He was not describing a miracle product. He was not making unbelievable promises. He simply explained that many gardeners use seaweed products to help support plants during periods of stress. I appreciated that approach because it sounded realistic. Even then, I remained skeptical. Part of me expected very little, but another part of me was curious enough to try. Looking back now, I am grateful that I listened. After that conversation, I decided to give seaweed a chance, not because I expected a miracle, but because gardening often rewards curiosity. So instead of dismissing the suggestion, I brought home a bottle of seaweed extract and decided to see what would happen. Before using it, I spent some time reading the instructions and learning how other gardeners incorporated it into their routines. One thing I appreciated right away was how simple the process seemed. There were no complicated schedules, no special equipment, and no major changes to the way I was already caring for my plants. I mixed the seaweed extract according to the directions and applied it as part of my normal watering routine. Then I continued doing everything else exactly as I had before. I watered when the plants needed water. I kept an eye on the weather. I checked for pests and monitored the overall condition of the garden. The seaweed extract was not replacing good gardening practices. It was simply becoming one small part of them. It took only a few minutes, and after a while, it became just another part of my weekly gardening rhythm. At that stage, I still had no idea whether I would see any meaningful difference. I was simply giving the plants an opportunity to recover from the stress of the season. Gardening has taught me that meaningful changes often happen slowly. A few days after starting my seaweed routine, the garden looked exactly the same. A week later, not much had changed either. But as the weeks passed, I began noticing small differences. The first thing that caught my attention was the color of the leaves. The plants seemed to regain some of the rich green color they had lost during the worst part of the heat. New growth appeared healthier and more consistent. The garden still faced the same weather conditions, but the plants seemed to handle those challenges a little better than before. Every morning, I continued my routine of walking through the garden with a cup of coffee, looking closely at the leaves, stems, flowers, and developing fruit. What impressed me most was not a sudden explosion of growth. It was the overall sense of resilience. The plants looked less stressed. New blossoms continued to appear. The vines remained active. Even during periods of intense summer heat, the garden no longer felt like it was slowly giving up. That was the moment I stopped thinking of seaweed as something that only belonged at the beach. Watching those tomato plants recover helped me understand why so many gardeners value it. Not because it performs miracles, but because it became one more tool that helped plants cope with difficult conditions and continue growing. By the end of the season, I found myself thinking less about seaweed and more about what the experience had taught me. The truth is, this story was never really about a bottle of seaweed extract. It was about recovery. Every garden faces challenges. Heat, storms, pests, and unexpected setbacks are all part of the journey. What matters is not whether problems appear. What matters is how we respond when they do. That was the lesson those tomato plants taught me last summer. They were not perfect plants growing under perfect conditions. They simply needed a little support to keep moving forward. In many ways, I think people are not so different. We all go through difficult seasons. We all have moments when we feel tired, discouraged, or stretched beyond our limits. During those times, recovery often comes from small actions repeated consistently over time. A little patience, a little care, a willingness to keep going. Today, when I look at those tomato plants, I remember that healthy gardens are not built by perfection. They are built by consistency, patience, and learning. Sometimes plants need a little help recovering, and sometimes gardeners do too. Thank you for spending part of your day with me here at the Green Hack. If you have ever used seaweed in your garden, I would love to hear about your experience in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this video, please take a moment to like, subscribe, and join us for more simple gardening lessons and backyard wisdom. Until next time, keep growing, keep learning, and keep giving your garden the chance to recover and thrive.